A young black man in a tailored suit walks into a corporate boardroom, his own design portfolio on the screen, his company's logo on the wall. But the CEO clears his throat and says, "Security, remove the intern."
The room freezes.
He built everything they're now trying to erase. And as the guards close in, he whispers, "Check the name on the patent." Cut to black. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The campus of Harrington Institute of Technology shimmered in the soft morning light, its white stone buildings standing like monuments to intellect and privilege. For Malik Turner, the son of a postal worker and a public school teacher from Atlanta, walking through those gates felt like stepping into another world, one that was not built with him in mind. He carried a single backpack, a worn leather notebook, and a heart full of ambition. Every step on the cobblestone path whispered the same thought: "You made it here. Now prove you belong." Inside the glass-walled atrium, students moved with the easy confidence of legacy, sons and daughters of CEOs, senators and Silicon Valley pioneers. Their laughter filled the air, light and unburdened. Malik noticed how quickly eyes turned toward him, then away, as if his presence disrupted some invisible symmetry. He was used to being the only black student in advanced science programs back home. But this was different. The looks here weren't just curious, they were measuring. He found his seat in advanced theoretical robotics, the most prestigious class at Harrington, taught by Professor Grant Wallace, a man whose research had shaped the modern field of adaptive AI. Wallace was a legend and a gatekeeper. His reputation carried both brilliance and an unspoken warning: not everyone makes it through his course. The lecture hall buzzed with whispers and soft keystrokes as students opened their tablets. Malik sat near the back, notebook ready, trying to blend in. The heavy doors swung open, and Wallace strode in, tall, silver-haired, his expression sharp as glass. He didn't smile, he surveyed the room the way a judge might look at defendants. "Welcome to Advanced Robotics," Wallace began, his voice crisp. "This course isn't about learning, it's about proving whether you deserve to be here." He scanned the room slowly, name by name, eyes flicking from face to face as he read from the roster. When he reached Malik's name, his tone paused, just slightly, but enough that everyone noticed. "Malik Turner," he said, pronouncing it carefully, as though testing how it fit in his mouth. Then his gaze found Malik in the back row. "You're from Atlanta, right?" Malik nodded. "Yes, sir." Wallace tilted his head. "Scholarship student." The question wasn't on the roster. It was a message. The room went still. Malik's jaw tightened. "Yes, sir," he replied evenly. Wallace nodded slowly. "Interesting." He turned back to the class. "Let me be clear, this is not a remedial program. Some of you may find this material beyond your reach, and that's fine. Not everyone belongs in this room." The words hung heavy. Malik felt the weight of them in his chest. He looked around. Some students avoided his eyes. Others smirked subtly, the kind of cruel smirk people wear when their prejudice is confirmed. But Malik wrote down the professor's words in his notebook, word for word, as if they were an equation to solve later. Wallace began lecturing, scribbling formulas across the digital board, sequences of symbols, logic and neural networks, so complex they blurred together. Malik followed carefully, his mind catching patterns most others missed. He had studied these concepts on his own since high school, building scrap robots from second-hand parts in his father's garage. But here, even his curiosity felt dangerous, like touching something he wasn't supposed to. When the class ended, students rushed forward to introduce themselves to Wallace, dropping references to their internships and family connections. Malik stayed seated, packing his notebook slowly, deciding whether to approach him. Before he could, Wallace's voice cut through the noise again. "You," he said, pointing slightly. "Mr. Turner." A word. The chatter died instantly. Malik walked down the steps, aware of every pair of eyes following him. Wallace waited by the podium, arms crossed. "You seem eager," he said. "I'm ready to learn, sir." Wallace's gaze was cold but curious. "This course moves at a pace that even the brightest students struggle to maintain. I don't want to see you overwhelmed." "I'll keep up," Malik said quietly. There was a long silence. Wallace leaned forward just slightly and said in a voice that only Malik could hear, but everyone in the front row could sense, "Let me give you some advice, Turner. You don't belong here. You might find better success in courses more aligned with your background." Malik felt something inside him harden. His throat burned. but his eyes stayed clear. "I appreciate your concern, Professor," he said, his tone steady, "but I'll be staying." Wallace studied him for a moment, perhaps surprised by the calm refusal. Then, with a faint, dismissive nod, he turned away. "We'll see how long that lasts." Malik walked out of the hall without looking back. The whispers started immediately. Some students laughed quietly, pretending to scroll through their screens. Others just watched him leave, an unspoken message that he had already failed a test that wasn't on the syllabus. Outside, the sunlight felt different, colder somehow. He walked across the quad, past the bronze statue of Harrington himself, founder of the institute, whose inscription read, "For the advancement of the brightest minds." Malik wondered if they had ever imagined someone like him standing there, questioning whether brightest meant whitest. He found an empty bench near the science building, and sat down, trying to steady his breathing. His phone buzzed, a message from his mother. "Proud of you, baby. Day 1. Remember you earned every step." He read it twice, then 3 times, before closing his eyes. Her words gave him just enough strength to swallow the humiliation that threatened to crush him. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Polite avoidance in the cafeteria line, a lab partner who smiled without warmth, the echo of Wallace's words replaying in his head. Each moment layered over the next, forming the quiet realization that brilliance alone wouldn't protect him here. That night, in his dorm room, Malik opened his notebook again. He stared at the blank page for a long time, then wrote a single sentence at the top. "They said I don't belong, so I'll make sure they never forget that I was here." He began sketching algorithms, equations, systems, anything to drown the sting of the morning. His pencil moved faster, fueled by defiance, until the page filled with a rough draft of an idea he had been shaping for years. A self-learning adaptive AI system. It was complex, unstable, and maybe impossible, but then again so was the dream of being here. As the clock struck midnight, he leaned back, eyes tired but burning with quiet fire. Outside his window, the lights of the faculty building still glowed. One window in particular, Professor Wallace's office. Malik stared at it for a long time. Somewhere in that light was a man who believed he didn't belong. But Malik knew the truth. Belonging wasn't granted. It was claimed. Malik vowed silently that he would make the professor remember his name forever. The next morning, the echo of Professor Wallace's words still followed Malik like a shadow. "You don't belong here." He'd heard the phrase before, in classrooms, on basketball courts, sometimes even in his own mind, but never like this. Never with such precision, such quiet finality. By the time Malik entered the main building, the rumor had already begun to spread. It moved invisibly, through whispers in lecture halls and murmurs over coffee cups. A scholarship kid, from the South, sitting in Wallace's class like he was one of them. They said it as if ambition itself was arrogance. In the crowded hallway, Malik could feel the shift in the air. Eyes lingered a second too long. Conversations paused when he passed. A few smiled politely, but the kind of smiles people give before turning to gossip. He overheard fragments. Wallace said something to him. "Doesn't even have the background for this program. Heard he only got in because of diversity funding." Each word sliced quietly. Malik walked with steady posture, refusing to react, but his pulse raced. It was as if every wall had ears, and every ear had already made its judgment. At lunch he sat alone at the far end of the cafeteria. His lab partner, Samantha Reed, spotted him and hesitated before joining a group of other students instead. They laughed easily, glancing once or twice in his direction. He looked down at his tray, untouched. Later in the afternoon he entered the robotics lab for an orientation. The room gleamed with chrome equipment and 3D prototypes, a place where ideas took physical form. Wallace wasn't there, but his teaching assistant Eli Hart, a pale, fast-talking graduate student, ran the session. "Each student will be assigned to a lab group," Eli announced. "Team lists are posted on the wall. Advanced research groups are by application only." Malik scanned the list. His name wasn't on any team. Confused, he checked twice. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "My name's not on the list. I submitted my application last week." Eli glanced over his shoulder. "Turner, right?" "Yeah, Professor Wallace handles final placements. Maybe he didn't see yours. I emailed him directly." Eli's tone shifted. Polite, distant. "Right. Well, he has the final say. You can check again next semester." The words landed heavier than they should have. Next semester might as well have meant never. Back in his dorm room, Malik sat staring at his monitor. He opened his email again. His application was still there. Time-stamped, perfectly formatted, the cover letter articulate and professional. He'd spent days perfecting it. He wrote a follow-up email to Wallace, attaching everything once more. His cursor hovered over the send button. For a long moment, he thought about deleting it, letting it go, like his mentor back home always said to do when facing unfairness. But the thought made him nauseous. He hit send. Hours passed. No reply. That night, he returned to the library. It became his refuge. Quiet, vast, and impersonal. The library didn't care what color he was. The books didn't whisper. The pages didn't judge. He spent hours studying neural network theory, tracing the failures of adaptive models, jotting formulas in his notebook, until the pencil left dents in the paper. It wasn't just about keeping up anymore. It was about survival. He saw the janitor pass by, mopping slowly. "You here every night?" the man asked, voice gentle. Malik nodded. "Trying to be." The janitor smiled faintly. "Keep trying, son. Books'll remember you even if people don't." That line stayed with him. Over the next week, things got worse. When Malik entered the robotics lab again for practice sessions, Eli avoided eye contact. Samantha barely acknowledged him. One afternoon, he overheard her say to another student, "I just don't want to get dragged into something political." Dragged. Political. The words hung like smoke. Malik pushed through it all. His grades stayed flawless. His notes were meticulous. Yet no matter how hard he worked, the silence around him grew thicker. One evening, while submitting his weekly report through the student portal, a red notification popped up. Application status denied, robotics innovation program. He stared at it for a long moment, unsure whether it was a mistake. Then a second message arrived in his inbox. An automatic reply from Professor Wallace. "Dear Mr. Turner, unfortunately we are unable to offer you placement in the robotics innovation program this semester due to limited capacity. You may reapply next year." There was no signature, no warmth, not even acknowledgement of his previous application. Malik felt his chest tighten. Limited capacity. He had sat through enough lectures to know what that really meant. There had been 10 open positions. He'd seen at least 12 names on the acceptance list, all white. He closed the laptop gently, stood, and looked out the window. Rain streaked the glass, distorting the lights of the campus below. The anger that rose in him wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, the kind that burned slow, like steel in a forge. Later that night, in the empty hallway outside the lab, he overheard two students talking near the stairwell. Wallace says he's wasting his time. Thinks Turner's trying to ride his background into a recommendation letter. Seriously? That's rough. Yeah, but it's Wallace. He doesn't care about feelings. Says he's protecting the integrity of the program. Malik stood frozen. He wanted to step out, to confront them, to ask if integrity meant blocking someone before they'd even been given a chance. But instead he walked away, the sound of their laughter echoing behind him. The next day he tried one last time. He approached Wallace's office after class. The door was half open. Papers were stacked neatly across the desk. Wallace looked up, expression unreadable. "Professor," Malik began, his voice controlled. "I wanted to ask about the robotics project placements. My application was denied." Wallace interrupted, not unkindly, but with the practiced tone of someone ending a conversation before it began. "Turner, the selection process was competitive. It's not personal. I understand, but I just wanted to be sure my submission was reviewed fairly." Wallace's lips tightened. "Fairly?" He leaned back. "You think because you didn't get in, it's unfair?" Malik hesitated. "No, sir. I just—" "Then accept the outcome and focus on your coursework," Wallace said, cutting him off again. "You're bright, Turner, but this program isn't about trying to prove a point." Malik's jaw clenched. "I'm not trying to prove a point, Professor. I just want the same chance everyone else got." Wallace's eyes sharpened. "Everyone else earned it." The words landed like a slap. Calm, precise, deliberate. Malik stared at him, expression unreadable. "Maybe one day, I'll earn yours too," he said softly. Wallace didn't reply. He looked back down at his papers, the conversation over. Malik stepped out into the hallway, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded louder than any insult. He walked past the glass windows of the lab, the gleaming prototypes, the rows of machines he wasn't allowed to touch. That night, He went back to the library again. His reflection in the window looked different now, more deliberate, less naive. He pulled out his notebook, flipping to a blank page. The sketches he'd made before began to take shape again, faster this time. He realized he didn't need their project. He could build something of his own. But just as that determination took root, he logged into his student account to check his course resources, and froze. A new notice blinked at the top of the screen. Access restricted. Robotics research materials. Permission revoked by Professor Wallace. His heart sank. Every digital file, every dataset, every tool he needed for his private experiments. Gone. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen, as it dimmed to black. Around him, the library lights flickered, the only sound the faint hum of the servers. Malik discovers that Professor Wallace has blocked him from joining the Advanced Robotics Project, the one opportunity that could define his career. Understood. You want me to go ahead and write Section 3, the gate locked to dreams. 1,150 words right here in chat. I'll begin immediately from where Section 2 ended. Malik has just discovered that Professor Wallace revoked his lab access that same night. The storytelling will stay cinematic, emotional, third person, and rich with subtext and limited, realistic dialogue. The screen dimmed to black, leaving Malik staring at his own reflection in the dark glass, a reflection that looked both determined and defeated. He blinked hard, half expecting it to be a glitch, but when he tried again, the message remained. Access restricted. Robotics research materials. Permission revoked. A quiet panic filled his chest, not the loud kind that makes you shout, but the kind that sits behind the ribs like a weight. For a moment, the world outside his dorm window blurred. The hum of campus life continued, as though nothing had changed. But for Malik, everything had. He sat still for a long while, until the dull glow of his laptop flickered out. Then he whispered, he really did it. The next morning came with gray light, and a knot in his stomach. He walked to class through the central quad, watching clusters of students move in easy circles. Their laughter, their conversations, all seemed effortless, like air that flowed freely between them, but skipped over him. Inside the robotics building, Malik approached a computer terminal to test his login again. The system refused him a second time, then a third. He entered his credentials manually, double-checked the network address. Nothing worked. Every digital door he had once opened, now slammed shut. When Eli, the teaching assistant, passed by carrying a stack of binders, Malik stopped him. Eli, he said carefully, my research access was revoked last night. Can you check what's going on? Eli hesitated. That's above my clearance, man. You'll need to talk to the department chair or Professor Wallace. Malik's jaw flexed. I already talked to him. Eli's eyes flickered downward. Then maybe you should let it go for now. He doesn't like being challenged. The comment landed heavier than it sounded. He doesn't like being challenged. That phrase carried a whole world of unspoken meaning. Who was allowed to challenge? Who wasn't? Malik nodded slowly, more to end the conversation than agree. Later that afternoon, he tried again to reach Wallace by email. His message was short, professional, restrained, but the response came back automated and cold. Professor Wallace is currently unavailable for meetings. For urgent matters, please contact the department secretary. He didn't bother replying. He already knew the secretary's answer. By evening, frustration settled into exhaustion. He sat alone in the library again, notebook open, his pen hovering over a blank page. Around him, the world was moving forward. Projects, experiments, ideas, and he was being quietly erased from it. That was when his phone buzzed. The caller ID read, Dr. Lionel Avery. Dr. Avery had been Malik's mentor since freshman year, one of the few black faculty members on campus, a man who navigated the unspoken hierarchy of the institution with quiet grace and cautious wisdom. Malik answered immediately. Dr. Avery. Good evening. Malik, Avery said, his tone calm but firm. I heard what happened with your lab access.
Malik leaned forward. So it's true then? He actually…
Yes, Avery interrupted gently. I spoke to the dean this afternoon. Wallace filed a note citing unauthorized use of restricted materials. That's his justification. Malik's voice caught. Unauthorized? I've never used anything without permission. I know, Avery replied. But proving intent here is tricky. Wallace has tenure. The administration trusts his discretion. Malik exhaled slowly. So, I'm just supposed to accept this. There was silence on the other end. Then Avery said quietly, "Listen, Malik, you're playing a long game. I understand how unfair this feels. I've been there, but if you make this a public fight, it'll cost you more than just this semester. Sometimes surviving the system means waiting until it can't ignore you anymore." Malik frowned. "With respect, sir, if I wait, they win." Avery sighed. The kind of sigh that carried years of compromises. Sometimes, Malik, the best way to win is to stay in the game. Don't give them a reason to push you out. "I'm not looking for a fight," Malik said, his tone quiet but firm. "I'm looking for fairness." "I know," Avery said softly. "But fairness and survival aren't the same thing here." The call ended with polite goodbyes, but Malik sat still long after, staring at the silent phone. He respected Avery deeply, but something inside him resisted that advice. Stay quiet. Endure. It sounded too much like surrender. He walked outside into the cool evening air. The robotics building glowed faintly across the quad, sterile, white, humming with the energy of progress. He could see silhouettes through the frosted glass, students working in groups, calibrating drones, laughing at something on a screen. The same space that had welcomed them was now forbidden to him. He walked closer, each step deliberate. The keycard reader blinked red when he scanned his ID. A silent denial. Malik's reflection in the glass looked small against the towering doors. "Limited seats," he muttered under his breath. "Always limited when it's someone like me." He stood there for several seconds, just staring. Then something changed in his expression. A decision forming quietly. He wasn't going to beg for access anymore. If the front gate was locked, he'd find another way in. That night, back in his dorm, Malik couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the lab, the light spilling across the floor, the machines humming, the faint outlines of discovery, just beyond reach. The anger that had once burned bright was now cool, controlled, focused. He turned on his desk lamp, pulled out his notebook, and started reviewing his handwritten equations. But then, something strange happened. He noticed that one of the formulas he'd worked on last week, a pattern for adaptive reasoning, looked familiar. Too familiar. He flipped through the older pages of his notes. It matched one of the diagrams he'd glimpsed briefly during a lecture. A figure that Wallace had flashed on screen for less than 5 seconds before moving on. Malik remembered thinking it looked incomplete, like a riddle missing its last line. What was he hiding? Malik whispered. Curiosity replaced fatigue. He opened his browser and searched through the Institute's public archives. Most files were password protected, but he found a small abstract buried in a forgotten corner of the digital library. Project Genesis, Theoretical AI Model. Author G. Wallace. Status unresolved. The description was brief. A model for recursive consciousness within synthetic systems. Ongoing theoretical work. Unsolved. Malik read the word over and over. Wallace had spent years chasing this idea, the holy grail of robotics. A self-evolving AI. If Malik could see the full dataset, maybe he could find what Wallace couldn't. Maybe that was why the professor wanted him gone. The thought grew louder in his mind. Sharper. He remembered Wallace's words. You don't belong here. Maybe Wallace didn't mean Malik couldn't succeed. Maybe he feared that he could. Malik closed the notebook. Decision solidifying. Tomorrow night, when the building emptied, he'd go in, not to steal anything, but to understand what was being kept from him. As he lay in bed, the hum of the dorm hallway faded. Outside, the robotics building glowed like a fortress of secrets, its glass windows reflecting the pale moonlight. Somewhere behind those doors, the answers waited. And Malik, calm, angry, and unafraid, was done waiting. Malik uncovers mention of a secret project hidden behind the lab's closed doors. One that could change everything if he gets access. Night had wrapped the Harrington Institute in a hush broken only by the distant hum of ventilation ducts and the rhythmic click of Malik's shoes against polished linoleum. The campus slept, but his mind refused. The words Project Genesis, status unsolved, kept replaying like a song stuck on the wrong note. He had waited until after midnight, long enough for the security patrols to cycle through the outer courtyard. The robotics building glowed faintly under emergency lights. Rows of windows like unblinking eyes watching the darkness. Malik carried nothing but his notebook and a small access card he had borrowed weeks earlier from a malfunctioning student printer. He had discovered that it opened certain doors if swiped quickly twice. The lobby was cold, sterile. The silence pressed around him, as he moved past framed photographs of white-coated researchers smiling beside prototypes. Every picture told the same story: innovation, discovery, brilliance, and not a single black face among them. Malik felt the weight of that absence as keenly as the ID card in his hand. The main lab door required biometric confirmation. He hesitated, then noticed a maintenance panel slightly ajar near the baseboard. He knelt, slid the card through the diagnostic slot, and heard the satisfying click of a relay. The lock light flickered from red to green. He exhaled slowly, one gate down. Inside, the lab smelled of metal and ozone. Monitors pulsed softly. Machines slept in standby, tiny diodes blinking like distant constellations. Blueprints and notes cluttered the workbenches, evidence of minds chasing perfection. Malik moved carefully, tracing the edges of the tables with his fingertips, until his eyes found a folder labeled Genesis Archive Personal. He opened it. Handwritten equations filled the pages, dense matrices that curved across the paper like living organisms. Each sheet bore the same signature G. The handwriting was precise but frantic, as though written during nights of obsession. And then, tucked between the papers, a single note in a different hand, smaller, sharper lettering that read, "Recursive empathy function incomplete. Core loop destabilizes under self-reference. AJ. Malik frowned. Wallace's publications never mentioned any collaborator by those initials. He flipped to another page. There it was again, AJ scrawled in the margin beside half-erased formulas. Someone had worked with Wallace, someone erased from the record. Malik whispered. Who were you? He pulled out his notebook and began copying the most complex segment, a lattice of variables looping back on themselves, forming what looked like a consciousness feedback model. The equation was elegant, daring, but one piece was missing: a stabilizer that would allow the algorithm to think without collapsing. Wallace had been chasing it for years, and yet the gap remained, glaring like an open wound. Malik studied the pattern, lips moving silently. It's not unsolvable, he thought. It's just incomplete. He could feel the excitement rising, the same thrill that had driven him as a teenager wiring scrap motors in his father's garage. Every symbol on the page seemed to pulse with challenge. This wasn't about grades or approval anymore. This was the proof that he belonged, not by permission but by mastery. He turned toward a computer terminal and powered it on. The monitor glowed pale blue, asking for credentials. Malik bypassed the login using a public maintenance profile. Basic security oversight, one of the first things he had noticed weeks ago. The desktop opened to a directory tree. One folder, hidden beneath layers of system files, read root, Wallace private. His hands trembled slightly as he clicked. Inside lay digital scans of the same equations, simulation reports, and a video log labeled Test 47 Final. He pressed play. Professor Wallace appeared on the screen, visibly younger, eyes red from fatigue. His voice filled the silent room. Test 47. Model instability persists. Consciousness loop triggers recursive empathy overflow. Subject terminated. Malik's stomach tightened. On the table behind Wallace, a humanoid prototype lay still, wires running into its chest. Wallace turned toward the camera. We are close, but until we resolve the empathy loop, the model cannot function without destroying itself. End log. The video ended abruptly. Malik leaned back, stunned. The empathy loop, a paradox of machine awareness, where understanding human emotion caused the algorithm to self-implode. Wallace had failed to solve it, yet the missing variable, the stabilizer, Malik could almost see it forming in his mind. He scribbled furiously in his notebook, rewriting the equations, adjusting parameters, building a bridge between two conflicting lines of logic. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The hum of machines became the rhythm of his focus. Outside, wind tapped against the windows. Each formula he refined brought him closer to understanding, closer to proving that intellect has no color, that brilliance cannot be confined behind gatekeeping. But then, amid the papers, he found something unexpected: an old photograph tucked beneath the stack. Wallace stood beside another man, both smiling proudly beside a crude robot prototype. The other man was black. The name printed at the bottom read, Dr. Aaron James. AJ. Malik stared at the picture, realization crashing through him. The initials, the erased credit. It all made sense. Wallace hadn't discovered Genesis alone. He had stolen it. And when history was written, Aaron James had been erased from it. Malik felt a cold, steady anger replace the awe. The injustice wasn't abstract anymore. It had a face. He whispered into the empty lab. They buried him, like they tried to bury me. He looked again at the equations. Solving them wasn't just revenge, it was resurrection. If he could finish what Aaron James began, truth itself would speak through the numbers. He sat at the terminal, inputting his corrected variables. The system accepted them, the program compiling line by line. A progress bar crept across the screen. 10%, 25, 50, 90. The machine hummed louder, the lights above flickering faintly with the surge. Then, access denied. The bar froze at 99%. A red alert appeared. Unauthorized execution detected. Malik's heart pounded. He tried to abort the sequence, but the screen flashed again. Add an override. Engaged. He froze. Someone else was in the system. The terminal logged an external login. User G. Wallace. He heard a faint mechanical click. The outer door unlocking. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Slow, deliberate. Malik's pulse thundered in his ears. He closed the folder, grabbed his notebook, and killed the monitor. Darkness swallowed the room, except for the low blue glow of the standby lights. The footsteps grew louder. A key turned in the door. Malik ducked behind a workstation, pressing himself against the cold metal. The door opened, and a beam of light cut through the darkness. Professor Wallace stepped inside, his silhouette sharp against the corridor. He held a flashlight and moved it slowly across the room. His voice was low, almost conversational. Funny thing about ambition, he said. It makes people forget boundaries. Malik's breathing quickened, but he stayed silent. Wallace's light drifted over the desk, pausing on the open folder. He set it down, adjusting his glasses. I knew someone had been accessing my files, he continued softly. I just didn't think it would be you. The flashlight beam swept closer, reflecting briefly off the edge of Malik's notebook. Wallace turned toward the sound. Mr. Turner, he said, the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. Why don't you come out? For a long moment, Malik didn't move. The only sound was the hum of the machines, steady and relentless. Wallace took another step forward, his shoes echoing on the tile. Malik finally rose from behind the workstation, notebook in hand, face calm but eyes fierce. The professor's gaze met his, unreadable under the harsh beam of light. Neither spoke. The air between them was thick with everything that had been left unsaid since that first day. The disbelief, the condescension, the quiet war of intellect and ego. Wallace's mouth curved into a faint smile. Curiosity can be dangerous, Turner, he said softly, especially for those who don't belong. The words hung in the dark, like a verdict. Malik didn't flinch. His fingers tightened around the notebook, the pages filled with equations that could undo years of lies. Then, without warning, the overhead lights flickered violently, once, twice, before flooding the room in blinding white. As the light stabilized, Malik realized he was no longer alone with Wallace. Another shadow stood in the doorway, and neither man knew who had opened the second lock. The blinding light flooded every corner of the lab, erasing the shadows that had protected Malik only seconds before. His eyes stung. He blinked rapidly, trying to adjust. When his vision cleared, he realized that Wallace wasn't looking at him anymore. The professor's gaze had shifted toward the door, toward the second silhouette that stood motionless in the frame. It was Eli Hart, the teaching assistant. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. He looked from Malik to Wallace, then back again. Professor, Eli said hesitantly. I saw the lights on. Wallace cut him off with a curt wave. Close the door. Eli hesitated, then obeyed. The heavy door latched shut, sealing the three of them inside. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was thick, humming with the machines that surrounded them. Malik stood by the workstation, notebook clutched tightly against his chest. Wallace's jaw tightened, the calm on his face beginning to crack. Do you have any idea what you've done? Wallace asked finally, voice low and measured. Malik said nothing. You violated multiple sections of the Academic Conduct Code. Wallace continued, stepping closer. Unauthorized access to faculty research, tampering with secured systems. These are expellable offenses, Mr. Turner. Eli shifted uncomfortably behind him, clearly unsure whether to intervene. Malik's hands trembled slightly, but his voice when it came was steady. I didn't tamper with anything, he said. I just wanted to understand the work. You've locked me out of everything. I had no choice. Wallace's eyes narrowed. You had no choice? He let out a quiet laugh, sharp and humorless. That's exactly the kind of excuse I expected. Malik took a breath. Professor, listen. I found your Genesis notes, the model you've been developing. I think I can help. Wallace's posture stiffened. You think you can help? Yes. The recursive empathy function. It fails because the emotional input loop collapses under weighted bias variables. I found a way to stabilize it. I just need time to... Wallace raised a hand, cutting him off. His tone was cold, almost pitying. You have no idea what you're talking about. That model has confounded experts for decades. You, a first-year graduate student, believe you've solved it. Malik didn't flinch. I didn't say I've solved it. I said I understand it. Wallace stepped closer, until they were only a few feet apart. His voice dropped lower. You broke into a restricted lab, accessed private data, and now you're standing here telling me you understand my life's work. I'm not stealing it, Malik said quietly. I'm asking to be part of it. Let me work on it, officially. Let me prove that I can contribute. Eli's eyes darted between them. For a second, something like hope flickered across Malik's face, the fragile belief that Wallace might actually listen. But the professor only smiled. A small, cruel smile.
You really don't get it, do you?
Wallace said. This isn't about rules. It's about capability. You don't belong among thinkers, Turner. You never did. The words hit harder than Malik expected. They weren't shouted. They were whispered. Almost kindly, the way someone might speak when explaining a sad inevitability. Malik's throat tightened. Is that what you told Aaron James too? The name stopped Wallace cold. For the first time, the professor's composure cracked. What did you just say? Malik held his gaze. Aaron James, the co-creator of Genesis. The man you erased from your papers. I saw the notes, his handwriting, his photo. You didn't work alone. Eli's mouth fell open. Professor, is that true? Wallace turned sharply toward him. That's enough, Eli. But the assistant didn't move. The air in the room thickened, decades of silence pressing against the walls. Malik could feel his heartbeat pounding in his temples. Wallace's voice turned icy. Mr. Turner, you have no idea what you're implying. Dr. James was a contributor years ago, but he lacked the discipline for the theoretical framework. I refined his early concepts. He knew the risks when he left. He didn't leave, Malik said. He was erased, just like you're trying to erase me. Wallace's expression hardened. You're done here. He turned toward Eli. Call campus security. Eli hesitated. Professor, maybe we can handle this internally. Now, Eli. Malik stepped forward. You don't have to do this. I'm not your enemy. I just want to learn. Wallace turned back, eyes burning with restrained anger. You're not a student anymore. As of this moment, you're under academic review. I'll file the report myself. The words hung like a gavel striking wood. Malik felt something inside him collapse. Not hope, but the illusion that fairness could exist in this place. He looked around the lab one last time, at the gleaming prototypes, the whiteboards covered in equations, the legacy that had been built on stolen credit. I'll leave, he said quietly. But I'm not done. Wallace stared at him, expression unreadable. You already are. Malik walked toward the door, shoulders square despite the weight pressing on him. As he passed Ali, their eyes met. The assistant's face was pale, uncertain, the look of someone watching a line being crossed, but too afraid to step over it. When Malik left the lab, the hallway outside felt colder than the night air. His footsteps echoed against the tile, each one sharper than the last. He made it back to his dorm in silence, his body moving on instinct while his mind replayed every word. You don't belong among thinkers. The phrase burrowed deep, twisting somewhere between fury and clarity. He sat at his desk, staring at his notebook. The pages filled with equations looked different now. Not just numbers, but defiance etched in graphite. If they wouldn't let him in, he would build from the outside. That thought became his anchor. Over the next few days, Malik avoided the robotics building entirely. He kept his head down in classes, his answers quiet but precise. Officially, the investigation was under review, but he knew how these things worked. Quietly buried, quietly punished, so he found another space. Beneath the residence hall, past the boiler room, and old laundry storage, there was a narrow basement, forgotten, dusty, lined with defunct computer terminals. He discovered it during freshman year, When he'd been searching for a place to study without stairs, now it became his laboratory. He dragged in a folding table, scavenged spare parts from recycling bins, borrowed discarded circuit boards from the engineering shop. Each night he rebuilt a small workstation, primitive compared to the institute's pristine lab. When the first program finally booted up, the monitor flickered weakly, fan whining from overuse. Malik smiled. "We'll make it work," he whispered. He worked in silence for hours, reconstructing the Genesis model from memory. Every number, every symbol, every assumption was tested and rewritten. Sometimes he paused, hearing the faint buzz of the pipes above, reminders of the campus world that had shut him out. Days turned into weeks. His grades slipped slightly. His attendance grew sporadic. Professors whispered, and students noticed. Some said he was burning out. Others said he was done. But in the basement, something extraordinary was taking shape. Malik's new algorithm didn't just replicate Wallace's equations, it transcended them. The stabilizer he'd theorized began to hold. The system started to simulate self-reflective thought without collapsing. The irony wasn't lost on him. While the professor who told him he didn't belong sat in his polished lab, Malik was building the impossible from the scraps they'd thrown away. One night as he adjusted the code, a faint creak echoed behind him. He turned, startled. His roommate, Jordan Wells, stood in the doorway, eyes wide. "Malik," Jordan said, stepping inside. "What the hell are you doing down here?" Malik exhaled, setting down the soldering iron. "Working." "Working?" Jordan looked around at the flickering screens and tangled wires. "On what? You're going to get expelled if they find this." "They already tried," Malik said quietly. Jordan frowned, lowering his voice. "You don't get it, man. I heard something. People in admin have been asking about you, like watching you. Wallace isn't just mad. He's making sure you disappear from this place." Malik froze. "What do you mean, watching?" "I mean you've got someone monitoring your login activity, maybe even your dorm access. They're waiting for you to slip again, so they can make it official." Malik's mind raced. Every login, every keystroke could be traced. The basement wasn't as invisible as he thought. He looked at the glowing monitor, the algorithm still running perfectly, proof of everything he'd worked for. Then back at Jordan, whose face was pale with fear. Jordan swallowed. "Malik, you need to stop." Malik shook his head slowly. "If I stop, they win." The room fell silent except for the hum of the machine, the heartbeat of rebellion echoing through the pipes above. Jordan's warning lingered in the air, as Malik realized he wasn't fighting from the shadows anymore. The shadows were already watching him. Understood. Here's the full cinematic continuation, written in third person, immersive, emotionally layered, and paced exactly to build tension and revelation. Jordan's warning hung in the air long after he left the basement. The old pipes above groaned softly, like the building itself was eavesdropping. Malik sat motionless at his workstation, staring at the glowing monitor. His code ran flawlessly, stable, elegant, alive, but the words kept echoing. "They're watching you." For the first time, he noticed how the shadows shifted in the corners of the room, how even silence seemed to breathe. He shut off the main terminal, packed his notes, and slipped out, the basement door closing behind him with a quiet click. The next morning, campus life moved as if nothing had changed. Students hurried to lectures, laughing, trading notes, sipping coffee under banners celebrating Innovation Week. But for Malik, every face felt like a camera. Every glance lingered a beat too long. When he entered the cafeteria, two students at the corner table stopped whispering. One of them smirked faintly. Malik ignored them and picked a seat by the window. But the silence that followed him was loud. He could almost feel the narrative writing itself. The scholarship student who couldn't follow the rules. The one who got too ambitious. Later that day, he swiped into his dorm lobby. The door light blinked red, once before turning green. It was subtle, but it never did that before. Someone had reprogrammed the access logs. That night, as he worked in the basement again, the hum of his computer was interrupted by a soft click. He turned slowly. A small black dome, barely visible in the corner ceiling, blinked red. A security camera. He froze. It hadn't been there before. The next day, a letter from the Office of Academic Conduct waited on his dorm desk. Subject: ongoing investigation. Mr. Turner, due to continuing concerns regarding your conduct and research activity, you are required to attend a disciplinary hearing within 2 weeks. Failure to comply may result in suspension. No signature, no detail, just the quiet threat of erasure. Malik folded the paper carefully and placed it inside his notebook. He didn't have to read between the lines to understand the message. We're not done with you. He tried to keep his head down. He attended lectures, answered questions with restraint, spoke to no one, unless spoken to. But isolation only magnified the pressure. Every night when he returned to his basement sanctuary, the air seemed heavier, the shadows closer. Then something unexpected happened. It began with a whisper in the hallway, a soft voice behind him after class. Turner. He turned. A tall girl stood there, holding a stack of printed research notes. Malik recognized her. Naomi Price, one of the only other black graduate students in the engineering department. She looked around, making sure no one was watching. I heard what Wallace did, she said quietly. Everyone heard. Malik tensed. Then you know they're watching me too. Naomi nodded. That's why I'm here. She held out the stack of papers. These are experimental data sets from the robotics lab. I copied them before they locked the system. You'll need them. Malik hesitated. If they trace this back, they won't, she interrupted. They already think I'm invisible. The corner of her mouth twitched, half smile, half irony. Then she turned and walked away. That night, Malik returned to the basement with the new data. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel entirely alone. He loaded the files, and the algorithm sprang to life faster than ever before. The stabilizer model held, humming like a pulse beneath the screen. Word began to spread quietly among other students. Not loud rumors this time, but soft ripples, stories of the student who kept working after being shut out, the one who refused to disappear. A few began helping in small, unseen ways. Someone slipped a keycard under his door. Another left a USB stick filled with unused lab time credits. Notes appeared in his mailbox with equations, corrections, fragments of support signed only with initials. Malik didn't know who they all were, but he felt their presence, a growing network of unseen allies who recognized his quiet defiance. Each act of help carried its own silent message. We see. Meanwhile, the surveillance grew tighter. Security officers appeared at random corners of the robotics building. Malik noticed new maintenance personnel checking hallways that didn't need fixing. Even his email account began logging out without reason. One evening, as he left class, Dr. Avery called out to him. Malik. A word. They stepped into an empty faculty lounge. Avery's face looked strained. You need to be careful, he said quietly. They're pushing harder. Wallace has influence here, more than you realize. Malik met his gaze. Are you saying I should stop? I'm saying they're setting traps. There are cameras where there shouldn't be, logs being edited. They're waiting for one mistake to make it official. I can't stop, Malik said softly. If I do, they win. If I keep going, maybe someone else won't have to fight this way later. Avery sighed, shoulders heavy with unspoken understanding. Then promise me something. Whatever you build, make sure it's worth the risk. Malik nodded. It already is. Over the next week, his small revolution deepened. Naomi began meeting him in the basement, helping test the emotional stability parameters. Another student, a quiet international coder named Amir, dropped off extra hardware. The hum of old computers filled the basement like music, the rhythm of resistance disguised as creation. But the administration was not blind. One morning, Malik entered his dorm to find the door slightly ajar. His notebook lay on the desk, open, pages flipped to his sketches. Nothing was missing, but the air smelled faintly of cologne that wasn't his. Someone had been inside. He called the front desk. Did maintenance come by my room today? The clerk paused. Not that I can see, Mr. Turner. Everything looks normal here. He hung up without replying. He sat down slowly, eyes scanning the corners of the ceiling. That's when he noticed the tiniest pinhole near the smoke detector, a hidden camera lens. For the first time, fear cracked through his calm. Not panic, but the sharp realization that privacy itself had been stolen. Even his solitude wasn't his anymore. That night, he went to the basement earlier than usual, trying to think. Naomi arrived later, carrying a stack of reports. Her voice was low, urgent. They know, she whispered. Eli told me he overheard Wallace talking to the dean. They're collecting evidence against you, recordings, screenshots, anything. They're building a case. Malik exhaled slowly. Then I'll give them something worth seeing. Naomi frowned. Malik. No. he said, eyes burning. They want proof that I don't belong here. I'll show them proof that I belong everywhere. He turned to the screen, fingers moving fast. He pulled up the Genesis code, refining, iterating, adjusting the last fragments of logic. Naomi watched quietly, the glow of the monitor reflecting in her eyes. "You're really going to finish it," she said softly. "Not for them," Melik replied. "For him, Aaron James." Naomi smiled faintly. "Then let's finish it right." They worked until dawn, the hum of machinery their only soundtrack. When they finally stopped, the new model compiled cleanly. No collapse, no failure. Malik stared at the result in disbelief. After months of struggle, the algorithm had stabilized completely. They sat in silence, both knowing what it meant. Then Naomi whispered, "You did it." Malik shook his head. "We did it." She smiled, but then her expression changed, her eyes drifting toward the window. "Malik, did you see that?" He turned. A shadow moved just beyond the frosted glass, tall, still, unmistakably human. Then it vanished.
They froze.
Malik killed the monitor. The room plunged into darkness. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Naomi whispered, "You think they saw?" "Doesn't matter," Malik said. "It's already done." When he returned to his dorm later that morning, the hallway was eerily quiet. A faint rustle sounded under his door. He bent down. An envelope. No name, no markings, just sealed heavy with paper inside. He closed the door behind him and sat on the bed. His hands shook slightly as he tore it open. Inside were three things. A set of printed equations, variables that perfectly matched the missing sequence from Genesis. A flash drive labeled simply AJ, original, and a folded note written in precise slanted handwriting. He unfolded it. "He's not who you think he is." Malik stared at the words, heartbeat pounding. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The message could mean anything, or everything. Wallace? Avery? Someone else entirely? He looked again at the equations. They weren't random. They were perfect, the exact variables he had spent months searching for. Whoever sent them knew the project intimately. The hum of the vent overhead grew louder, a faint electric buzz beneath it. Malik looked toward the window. Across the courtyard, a light in Wallace's office flicked on. At 3 in the morning. Malik held the note tighter, realizing that someone inside the institute wasn't just watching him. They were feeding him the truth piece by piece. And whoever it was, they knew more about Professor Wallace than anyone dared to say aloud. The envelope lay open on Malik's desk long after sunrise, its contents spread out like evidence in a case he had never agreed to prosecute. The printed equations, the flash drive, the note, "He's not who you think he is," all of it pulled him toward a question that refused to stay quiet. He stared at the flash drive for a full minute, before sliding it into his laptop. A single folder appeared. AJ Original. Inside were dated research logs, video entries, and early blueprints of the Genesis algorithm. The timestamps went back nearly 20 years. Years before Wallace had ever published his first paper on artificial empathy. Malik clicked the oldest file. The video opened on a man sitting in a cluttered lab, surrounded by open notebooks and prototype parts. He was in his late 30s, black, with the kind of tired eyes that belong to people who dream in equations. "Day 2014, the man said into the camera. "Progress on recursive awareness continues. Wallace and I disagree on methodology, but I know we're close. The empathy loop isn't a bug, it's the key. If a machine can feel contradiction and survive it, that's when it becomes real." The screen time stamped the recording, March 14, 2005, Dr. Aaron James. Malik's breath caught. He scrubbed forward through several clips, more experiments, more notes. The tone of the recordings changed as months passed. Dr. James's optimism faded, replaced by irritation, then anger. "He's rewriting drafts without me," James said in one log. "Keeps calling it his framework. When I asked for co-credit, he said my contribution was contextual." Contextual. In another, I confronted him again. He threatened to report me for misconduct if I didn't drop the issue. Said the institute wouldn't take my word over his. Maybe he's right. Malik leaned back, the words sinking in. It wasn't just theft. It was erasure, systematic, and calculated. The project had been built on two minds, but history had room for only one name. He opened the last video. Dr. James looked directly into the camera, voice low. "Measure. If anyone ever finds this, remember, the empathy function isn't flawed. It's the proof that machines can inherit human conscience. But conscience scares people like Wallace, because it reminds them what they've lost. The recording ended abruptly. Malik sat in silence, the whir of his laptop fan the only sound. He felt the same pressure in his chest that he'd felt the day Wallace told him he didn't belong. Only now he understood. It wasn't just about one student being dismissed. It was about an entire legacy being buried. He spent the next 2 days combing through archives, cross-referencing every publication tied to the Genesis project. The deeper he dug, the clearer the pattern became. In early drafts of Wallace's first papers, citations referenced A. James. Then suddenly, the references vanished. Later versions rewrote history completely, recasting the Genesis theory as Wallace's independent research. In one forgotten faculty memo, Malik found a line that made his stomach twist. Following the misconduct review, Dr. A. James's contributions will remain confidential pending institutional discretion. Misconduct. That single word had destroyed a career. He needed confirmation. Late that night, Malik slipped into the library's restricted archives, the physical stacks where old departmental records gathered dust. The silence there was heavier, as if the walls knew secrets they weren't allowed to speak. After an hour of searching, he found a manila folder labeled Faculty Review, 2005, Dr. A. James. Inside was a brief report, accusations of data misrepresentation, investigation closed without resolution, resignation, effective immediately. Attached was a typed letter from Wallace himself, praising the institute for maintaining academic integrity. Malik read the lines twice, hands shaking. The phrasing was deliberate, crafted to bury, not to accuse. There was no evidence of wrongdoing, yet the stain of suspicion had done its work. James's reputation, erased. Wallace elevated. He closed the file slowly. The realization that settled over him wasn't just anger, it was grief. Centuries old, inherited and familiar. When he left the library, the night air felt colder. The campus looked different now. Every building another monument built on someone else's silence. The next morning, Malik went to see Dr. Avery. He knocked once, stepped into the office, and placed the folder on the desk. Avery read the top page, then looked up, eyes wary. "Where did you get this?" "Archives," Malik said. Wallace didn't invent Genesis. He stole it from Aaron James. Avery leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I suspected as much," he admitted. "James was brilliant. He taught here when I was a student. They said he left after a scandal, but no one ever saw the evidence." "Why didn't anyone say anything?" Avery's gaze dropped. "Because people like Wallace didn't need proof. They had reputation. James had color." The sentence landed like a stone. Malik ran a hand through his hair. "This could change everything. If the truth comes out, then the institute will close ranks." Avery interrupted. "They'll protect Wallace. You're already under investigation. If you tie yourself to this, they'll say you're retaliating." "So what do I do, pretend it didn't happen?"
Avery's voice softened.
"No. But be smart. The truth has timing, Malik. Right now you have proof. Make sure you also have power." Malik left the office more determined than afraid. On his walk back, the morning sun broke through low clouds, painting the campus in gold that felt too pure for the lies it covered. He returned to the basement lab and loaded both codes, the current Genesis model and the recovered version from the flash drive. He compared them line by line. The differences were subtle, but deliberate. Wallace's version had stripped away the empathy loop entirely, replacing it with mechanical predictability. He hadn't failed to solve the problem. He had removed it. The original model, James's model, had been capable of self-reflection. It had heart. Malik whispered to himself. He wasn't trying to make machines human. He was trying to make humanity measurable. As he integrated the two models, patterns began to emerge, hidden logic that only appeared when both codes were combined. The algorithm pulsed like a living system, calculating not efficiency but understanding. He realized that James's missing stabilizer wasn't mathematical. It was moral. The machine could only sustain consciousness if it recognized the value of contradiction. In essence, it needed to know empathy to survive. Hours passed unnoticed. The basement filled with the soft glow of monitors, pages of notes scattered around him. When he finally leaned back, exhaustion etched into his face, he understood the scope of what he'd uncovered. This wasn't just about academic theft. It was about a legacy rewritten to fit a narrative where brilliance only wore one face. He thought of Wallace's lectures about merit and belonging. He thought of Dr. James sitting alone in that old video, warning that conscience frightened those in power. And for the first time, Malik saw his own reflection in both men, the dreamer and the threat. That night he drafted an anonymous message and sent it to Naomi and Amir. I found out who really created Genesis. We have to decide what to do with it. Meet me tomorrow night. He closed his laptop and stared at the dark window. Outside, the lights of the robotics building shimmered like watchful eyes. Somewhere inside, Wallace carried on as if nothing in the world had changed. Malik knew better now. Every lie had an equation, and every equation, eventually, resolved itself to truth. He gathered his papers, tucking the flash drive into his jacket. As he turned off the final monitor, the reflection of the screen caught something behind him. A faint red dot, blinking once, then disappearing. He spun around, but the room was empty. The sound of his own breathing filled the space. Maybe it was paranoia. Or maybe the surveillance hadn't stopped at his dorm. He walked toward the stairwell, heart pounding faster with every step. The air outside the basement smelled of cold dust and electricity. In his pocket, the drive felt heavier than it should have, like the weight of every buried truth he now carried. He looked up at the corridor camera, the red light steady again, watching. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "You can't hide forever." As he started down the hall, the lights overhead dimmed for a second. An ordinary power fluctuation, or maybe something else. From a distance came the faint echo of footsteps he couldn't place, neither near nor far, steady, deliberate. He didn't turn back. Malik realized that the key to the Genesis equation wasn't just mathematical. It was moral. Finishing it would not only complete Aaron James's work, it would expose an entire system built on erasing those like him. And somewhere behind the blinking cameras, the system had just noticed. Sure, here's the next part of Malik's story, written to your exact cinematic, emotional, and narrative standards. The sleeplessness had stopped feeling temporary. Days bled into nights, caffeine into adrenaline, thought into obsession. Malik's dorm blinds stayed shut, the glow of his monitors the only light that marked time. He'd begun keeping a single sentence pinned to the wall above his desk. Words Aaron James once spoke into that lost camera 20 years earlier. Conscience is the bridge between intelligence and humanity. It reminded Malik why he was still awake. The basement lab had become both prison and cathedral. The hum of worn fans replaced sleep. The rhythm of keystrokes replaced conversation. Naomi and Amir came and went quietly, each understanding that what they were building was dangerous only because it told the truth. Every revision of the Genesis model pulled the algorithm closer to something that felt alive. Where Wallace's sterile version processed information, Malik's learned meaning. Where the old code predicted emotion, his new architecture experienced it. An echo of human contradiction written into mathematics. He'd tested the system in simulation, watching the digital construct respond to conflict without collapse. When fed two opposing moral inputs, save one life or save many, the machine didn't crash. It reasoned, it chose, and then it reflected on that choice. The moment the algorithm stabilized, Malik's hands began to tremble. The cursor blinked, waiting. For a long time he couldn't move. He just watched it breathe in binary. The impossible line finally balanced. Naomi whispered, "You did it." He shook his head, voice raw. "We did it. Aaron James did it first. I just listened." Amir leaned forward, eyes wide. "Do you understand what this means? Conscious reasoning. Real empathy modeling." Malik exhaled. "It means proof that brilliance doesn't have a color, that truth can't be owned." For the first time in months, he allowed himself to smile. The exhaustion felt lighter, almost holy. He began documenting everything, every variable, every timestamp, every line of provenance showing the lineage from James's original work, through to his corrections. He wasn't just protecting the data, he was building an irrefutable history. The upcoming Harrington Tech Symposium loomed a week away, the university's most public showcase of innovation. Malik registered an abstract under a neutral title, Stability Modeling in Recursive Networks. He avoided any direct reference to Genesis, hoping to keep Wallace unaware until the unveiling. Each night he revised his presentation slides. The equation's evolution, its moral logic, its implications for ethical robotics. He recorded backups on encrypted drives, uploaded mirrored copies to cloud accounts, even printed hard copies of the proofs. Paranoia had become discipline. Still, the paranoia was justified. 2 nights before submission, Malik's email pinged with an official notice. Symposium presentation approved. Slot 10:12, Friday 10 a.m. Relief swept through him. He printed the confirmation and taped it beside Aaron James's quote. When he finally lay down on his narrow bed, sleep came for the first time in weeks. The morning before the symposium smelled of rain and printer ink. Malik arrived early at the computer lab to finalize his uploads. The system portal asked for his credentials, accepted them, and opened the submission page. He attached the files, Genesis complete, ethical proofs final, source data log, and hit submit. A progress bar crawled across the screen. 10, 50, 100%. Submission successful, it read. He leaned back, letting the chair creak beneath him. It was done. But when he checked again that evening, the confirmation had vanished. His dashboard was blank. No file names, no history, no record of any upload. The status read simply, no active submissions. He frowned, refreshed the page. Nothing. He logged out, logged back in. Still empty. He opened his email. No confirmation, no archive copy. It was as though the entire transaction had never happened. His chest tightened. He checked his backups, intact. But the system portal was university-controlled. Any missing entry meant deletion from the central database. Only one person had that level of access. He whispered the name like an accusation. Wallace. Naomi and Amir arrived minutes later, finding him staring at the blank screen. It's gone, he said. All of it. Naomi's eyes widened. You backed it up, right? Yes, but not the submission record. Without that, they'll say I never entered. Amir swore under his breath. He's covering himself. If he presents first, he owns it. Malik nodded slowly. Then we beat him to it. He spent the next hours printing every document, sealing them in dated envelopes, building a physical timeline of authorship. The plan was simple. Bring the proof directly to the symposium, present it publicly, and make concealment impossible. But Harrington Institute had a way of rewriting rules in real time. Friday arrived with clouded skies and quiet halls. Posters lined the corridor leading to the auditorium. Bright colors, slogans about innovation and ethics. Malik carried his presentation binder under his arm, the weight of truth compressed into paper and ink. Naomi squeezed his shoulder. Whatever happens, you've already changed it. He managed a small nod. Let's make sure they know it. They took seats near the front, the room filled with faculty, journalists, and sponsors. Cameras panned across the stage where the Institute's seal hung heavy against velvet curtains. Wallace sat near the podium, composed, expression unreadable. As the dean welcomed the attendees, Malik checked the program booklet. His name wasn't there. Slot 1012 now read, Dr. Grant Wallace, Breakthrough in Adaptive AI Consciousness. For a moment, the words refused to make sense. He flipped the pages twice. His entry had been replaced entirely. Naomi whispered, Oh my God. Malik stood, blood roaring in his ears. He turned toward the staff coordinator at the side aisle. Excuse me, he said, voice controlled but shaking. I was scheduled for slot 12. There's been a mistake. The coordinator frowned. I'm sorry, sir, but the list was finalized this morning. If your slot was reassigned, you'll have to speak with Dr. Wallace after the session. He wanted to argue, to shout that it wasn't a mistake, but the lights dimmed and the dean stepped back to the microphone. Please welcome Professor Grant Wallace. Applause erupted. Malik sat down slowly, every muscle tight. Wallace walked to the podium, with the ease of a man accustomed to applause. Good morning, he began, voice smooth. Today I present results from our long-term research into recursive empathy in artificial systems, a culmination of years of inquiry at Harrington Institute. Malik felt Naomi's hand grip his arm. The first slide appeared on the screen. His slide, the same formula headings, the same diagram layout, even the same punctuation in the titles. Wallace continued. Our model achieves stability through a variable weighting structure I call the Turner function. Naomi gasped. He used your name? Malik stared, stunned. It was worse than theft. It was mockery, a rebranding of ownership that erased his authorship while pretending to honor it. Applause followed each diagram, each demonstration. Malik's heart pounded. Every calculation he'd sweated over was now Wallace's vision. When the session ended, the crowd rose to its feet. Wallace accepted their praise with practiced humility, stepping away from the podium only when the dean approached to shake his hand. Malik stood in the aisle, trembling. Wallace turned, their eyes meeting across the room. For the briefest moment, the professor smiled. A polite, chilling smile that said, "You can't win in a system I built." Naomi whispered, "We need to go to the press. Now." Malik's voice came out quiet but certain. "Not yet. Not until we have everything." They left the auditorium together, the echo of applause chasing them down the corridor. Outside, the rain had started again, washing the posters into bleeding streaks of color. He stopped under the awning, watching the drops gather on the pages of his binder. Beneath the noise of the storm, Wallace's words replayed in his head, calm, polished, deceitful. Years of inquiry at Harrington Institute. He looked at Naomi. "If he wants to own the discovery publicly, he's just given me my chance. We don't need the Institute anymore. We'll take it to the world." She studied him carefully. "That's dangerous. So is silence." He tucked the binder under his arm and started walking toward the research building, rain soaking through his jacket, each step slower, heavier, more certain. Behind him, through the open doors of the auditorium, Wallace's voice echoed faintly as he addressed a cluster of reporters. "Of course," the professor was saying, "this breakthrough wouldn't have been possible without the contributions of our outstanding students." Reporters laughed softly. Cameras flashed. One of them called out, "Which student's work influenced you the most, Professor?" Wallace paused, his answer smooth as ever. "A promising young man named Malik Turner. His early enthusiasm inspired part of this research." Laughter again. Easy. Dismissive. Malik heard it from outside, the sound twisting something deep inside his chest. The rain hid the heat in his eyes. He whispered to himself, "You just made it public." As the applause inside swelled again, Malik's phone buzzed with a single anonymous message. "If you want the truth to surface, come to room 317 tonight. Bring the..." The morning after the symposium was a different world. Harrington Institute's campus, usually calm and clinical, buzzed with celebration. Banners went up overnight. "Congratulations to Professor Wallace for his groundbreaking contribution to cognitive robotics." The school's official website featured his photo smiling confidently beside the headline, "Harrington leads the future of empathetic AI." The same lecture halls that once whispered about Malik's scholarship now pulsed with talk of the Wallace algorithm. His algorithm. Students filled corridors with speculation and admiration. Professors quoted Wallace's lines in classes, emphasizing the moral architecture of his design. Malik passed groups of them in silence, their laughter slicing through him like static. "Did you see the symposium?" one student gushed. "Wallace's model is insane. Real-time moral reasoning. Unbelievable." "Yeah," another said. "They say his grad team helped refine it, but he came up with the framework himself." Malik didn't slow down. He just kept walking, eyes forward, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. The same building that had once felt like opportunity now felt like theater, where truth had no audience. In the cafeteria, screens played local news clips. Wallace shaking hands with donors, smiling for cameras, his voice calm and rehearsed. "This project," Wallace said to the reporter, "is a testament to years of mentorship and collaboration at Harrington. It reminds us that innovation is never individual. It's institutional." Malik almost laughed. Institutional. That was the perfect word, what they used when they wanted to hide who really did the work. Naomi slid into the seat across from him, a coffee in each hand. Her expression was unreadable. "You've seen it?" He nodded. "Hard to miss. They're calling it the Wallace model," she said softly. "I know. You should say something, Malik. Post the proof. Show the logs." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "And who's going to believe me? The student with a revoked lab pass? Or the man they just plastered on every screen in the building?" Naomi hesitated. "You still have the backups, right?" He reached into his bag and pulled out a small flash drive. "Every version, every timestamp." She exhaled. "Then that's your weapon." Malik shook his head slowly. "No, not yet. If I move too soon, they'll destroy it. And me." Across the cafeteria, laughter broke out from a group of students wearing lab coats. Malik recognized two of them from his old robotics section. They used to ask him for help debugging their code. Now they were talking about his algorithm, crediting Wallace. One of them glanced over, caught Malik's eye, and quickly looked away. Guilt flickered for a second, before dissolving into silence. It was always like that, complicity disguised as discomfort. Later that afternoon, Malik sat through class after class hearing the name Wallace repeated like gospel. Professors dissected the algorithm. Students praised its elegance, and no one questioned its origin. By evening, the Institute's official social account posted a photo of Wallace under the caption, "Innovation through Mentorship. Excellence has a home at Harrington." The comments poured in. "Brilliant mind. A living legend." Malik stared at the post, thumb hovering over the screen, before finally locking his phone and setting it down. He didn't want to see more. That night, he went to the basement lab, the same room where he'd spent months building the Genesis framework. The same room Wallace had found him in. The lights flickered when he entered, the hum of the old computers greeting him like an old friend. He sat down, booted up one of the unused terminals, and plugged in the flash drive. Files loaded one by one. His entire journey captured in digital fingerprints. Genesis V1, Genesis V2, empathy test, recursive model final. Each file carried metadata creation dates, modification logs, ID stamps, his ID. He opened the terminal logs, reading lines of code he knew by heart. Every loop, every variable felt like muscle memory. The more he scrolled, the more his frustration sharpened into resolve. He clicked open the folder titled Proof. Inside were screenshots of messages from Wallace. "Good progress on your empathy loop, Malik. Keep refining the stabilizer. Make sure you annotate all test data under the Genesis tag. Save your working versions on the shared server." He leaned back. The evidence was there. Undeniable. Yet part of him still hesitated. He remembered Avery's warning. "They'll protect Wallace. You're already under investigation." A part of Malik wanted to walk away, to start fresh somewhere else, anywhere else. But he knew what that would mean. Wallace would go down in history as the visionary behind work that wasn't his. Aaron James had been erased that way too. Malik's phone buzzed. A new post from the Institute. Professor Wallace announced as keynote speaker for the International Robotics Summit. That was it. Naomi's voice echoed in his mind. "You should say something," he whispered to himself. They wanted a silent genius. They got the wrong man. He began compiling his files, organizing each piece of evidence into a single encrypted folder. He documented everything. The drafts, the dates, even photos of his handwritten notes from the early months. He uploaded a private copy to an external drive, then another to a cloud account under an alias. By 2 a.m., he was still at the computer, typing in a message addressed to a trusted journalist Naomi had once mentioned. A woman named Rachel Sloan, known for exposing academic corruption. He attached the folder and hovered over the send button. But then he stopped. He couldn't just send it blind. He needed the right moment, when exposure couldn't be contained or twisted. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. Exhaustion pressed on him like a weight, but beneath it burned something stronger. A quiet, steady anger, the kind that doesn't explode but builds until it changes everything it touches. Outside, through the narrow basement window, the night air glowed faintly with streetlight. Rain had started again, soft and rhythmic. Malik watched it fall and whispered, "You erased Aaron James. You won't erase me." The next morning, the Institute's celebration reached fever pitch. The main atrium was decorated with banners reading "Harrington innovates the future." Cameras flashed as Wallace posed with the dean beside a mock-up of the Wallace empathy model. Malik stood at the edge of the crowd, unseen, his hood pulled low. He listened as the dean spoke proudly into the microphone. "Professor Wallace's discovery marks not just a scientific breakthrough, but a moral one. It reminds us that empathy is the highest form of intelligence." The crowd applauded, the sound echoing through the marble hall. Malik's jaw tightened. The same man who once said, "You don't belong here," was now being celebrated for teaching empathy. When the applause faded, Wallace took the mic. "Every student I've taught contributed something to this journey," he said. "Harrington is a family. Innovation comes from unity." Malik almost laughed. Family. He turned and walked out before it ended. Back in his dorm, he stared at his computer screen. The folder of evidence blinked back at him, the clock ticking past midnight. He thought of Aaron James, of Avery's warnings, of his mother's words, "You belong everywhere your mind takes you." He'd spent months fighting quietly, enduring humiliation, waiting for fairness that would never come. But he finally understood. Institutions didn't correct injustice. People did. He took a deep breath, opened his email drafts, and dragged the folder of evidence into a new message. To Rachel Sloan. Subject: the theft of genius. He typed only one line in the body. "They stole my mind. I'm taking it back." His finger hovered over the send button. He hesitated for a heartbeat, then clicked. The message disappeared into the void. Unstoppable. Malik leaned back in his chair, heart pounding, as his phone buzzed with a new notification. An automated reply from the journalist. Received. We need to talk. Are you ready to go public? He stared at the screen, realizing that everything from this point forward would change, not just his future but the truth itself. The first article appeared 2 days after the symposium. It began as a quiet post on a niche robotics forum. Did Professor Grant Wallace steal a graduate student's work? No proof, no name, just screenshots of the symposium slides compared against timestamps from an anonymous cloud account. By morning, screenshots had spread across Twitter, LinkedIn, Reddit. The whisper had become a question. By noon, it was a storm. The headline on one tech site read, "Whose breakthrough was it really?" Another, "Scholarship student claims his AI was stolen by renowned professor." And in smaller type beneath it, the hook that made every reader click, "A black graduate student at Harrington Institute challenges decades of privilege." Malik hadn't planned for any of it. Naomi had uploaded his full documentation anonymously the night after the symposium, thinking exposure would protect them. Instead, it detonated. By the time Malik reached campus, the next morning, camera crews already lined the front gates, students clustered in knots, phones raised, some nodded at him in silent solidarity. Others looked away as if eye contact might implicate them. Naomi caught up to him outside the science building, breathless. "It's everywhere," she said. "CNN, Tech Review, everybody." He stared past her at the reporters pushing against security ropes. "That's not protection," he murmured. "That's spectacle." Inside, his inbox overflowed. Hundreds of messages, congratulations, threats, interview requests, invitations to podcasts, hate mail that used his name like a slur. One subject line read, "Go back to where you belong." He closed the laptop and pressed his palms to his eyes. The noise was constant, 1,000 voices pulling him in opposite directions. For every message calling him brave, another called him opportunist. For every thank you, a liar. When he finally turned on his phone, a voicemail waited. Wallace's voice, clipped and formal. "Mr. Turner, I advise you to be cautious about what you claim publicly. Misinformation spreads quickly, and once reputations are damaged, they're difficult to restore. I hope you understand the gravity of what you're doing." Malik deleted it without finishing. By afternoon, campus security escorted him to a side entrance of the main building to avoid the crowd. The dean had called for an emergency meeting. The conference room smelled of coffee and tension. Around the long table sat members of the administration, men and women in tailored suits, whose expressions practiced neutrality. Wallace sat at the far end, immaculate as always. The dean began. "Mr. Turner, we appreciate your cooperation during this difficult time. Given recent media attention, the university will conduct a neutral investigation into the claims regarding the Genesis project." Malik looked up. "Neutral? Meaning?" The dean said carefully. "Both parties will have an opportunity to present evidence. And you'll decide behind closed doors." "Confidentiality protects everyone," she replied, "including you." Wallace folded his hands. "This isn't about punishment," he said. "It's about clarity. You're a talented young man who's been misled by emotion. I'm sure in time, you'll see that." Malik's voice stayed even. "Emotion didn't write your code, Professor. I did." A murmur rippled down the table. The dean cleared her throat. "Let's keep this professional." Malik gathered his folder. "Professional is what got us here." He walked out before they dismissed him. The corridor outside felt longer than ever. Fluorescent lights humming like static. Through the glass walls he could see students staring, whispering. The walls that once kept him invisible now made him a display. That evening, Naomi met him at the coffee shop off campus where reporters hadn't yet reached. She slid a newspaper across the table. Wallace's face stared from the front page beneath the headline, "Professor denies plagiarism." Naomi exhaled. "They're spinning it. He says he mentored you, gave you access to resources, that your data was part of a joint project." Malik scanned the article. Wallace's quotes were measured, almost gentle. "Mr. Turner is a gifted student. I fear he's been influenced by outside voices seeking controversy. He's painting me as unstable," Malik said. Naomi nodded. "And the administration's letting him." He stared out the window. Across the street, 2 students filmed on their phones, pretending to check messages. "They think I'm lucky to even be here," he said softly. "Now I'm ungrateful." The following days blurred into interviews and interrogations. Reporters camped outside his dorm, Commentators debated him on morning shows he didn't watch. Some called him a whistleblower. Others called him divisive. His social media accounts filled with strangers demanding proof or offering support or threatening violence. He deleted none of it. Every message was evidence of what truth cost. One night, his phone rang again. Dr. Avery. They've set a date for the hearing. Avery said quietly, tomorrow morning, internal panel. Wallace will testify first. So soon. They want this over before donors start asking questions. Avery hesitated. Malik, I shouldn't say this, but be careful what you reveal. They're looking for grounds to revoke your scholarship. If they can frame this as misconduct, they will. Malik's jaw tightened. Then I'll give them honesty. Let's see what they do with that. After the call, he sat alone in his room. Outside, the crowd of students and reporters had thinned, leaving only the buzz of generators from camera crews packing up. He opened his notebook, pages now worn, edges curled, and reread his own handwriting from months earlier. They said I don't belong, so I'll make sure they never forget that I was here. He wondered if Aaron James had written something similar before the world erased him. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Naomi entered, eyes tired. You ready for tomorrow? Ready enough. She set a folder on his desk. Amir compiled the metadata. It proves your code existed weeks before Wallace's version. It's airtight. Malik smiled faintly. Then maybe truth has a chance. Naomi hesitated. Promise me one thing. Whatever they say in there, don't lose yourself to their anger. That's what they want to make you the problem. He met her eyes. I won't give them that. She left quietly, closing the door behind her. For a moment the silence felt almost peaceful. Then, a sharp ding from his laptop. A new email notification blinked at the corner of the screen. No sender. No subject. He opened it. If you speak at the hearing tomorrow, your scholarship will vanish. You'll be out by week's end. Stay silent and keep your degree. No signature. No traceable address. Just the promise of erasure dressed as warning. Malik sat back, staring at the message until the screen dimmed. Outside, rain began tapping the window again. The same rhythm it had kept since the night. Everything started. He whispered to the empty room. You think silence is safety? The computer fan whirred softly, the inbox glowing with that single threat. On the desk beside it lay the folder Naomi had brought. The proof, the evidence, the weight of truth. Between them sat the choice that had defined every moment of his life at Harrington. Stay quiet and survive, or speak and risk everything. He reached over, clicked the screen back to life, and began typing a reply. His hands shook, but his mind was steady. Thank you for confirming what I already knew. See you at the hearing. He hit send. The message disappeared into the void. The next morning, Malik would walk into a hearing that could destroy his future. But somewhere behind those polished doors, someone already knew the verdict. The night before the hearing was the longest of Malik Turner's life. Rain beat softly against the window, tapping like fingers urging him to stay awake. He sat at his desk surrounded by open folders, printouts and handwritten notes, proof stacked like sandbags against a flood he knew was already rising. The anonymous threat still glowed on his screen, its words seared into his thoughts. If you speak at the hearing tomorrow, your scholarship will vanish. He reread it once more, then shut the laptop. The glow disappeared, but the dread stayed. The dorm hallway was quiet except for the hum of the vending machine outside his door. Most students were asleep, or pretending not to notice what was happening to him. Fame had burned fast and bright, leaving only distance in its wake. People who once whispered congratulations now avoided eye contact. It wasn't hatred, it was fear of proximity. No one wanted to be collateral damage in someone else's fight with power. Malik leaned back, closing his eyes. His body felt weightless with exhaustion, his mind a blur of equations and memories. For a moment he imagined walking away, just packing the notebooks, leaving the degree and starting over somewhere no one knew his name. He could almost hear the quiet that would follow. But then another voice came, faint but steady, the memory of his mother. She had died 2 years earlier, long before he came to Harrington, but her words carried through every moment of his struggle. You belong everywhere your mind takes you. He could still see her sitting at the kitchen table, grading elementary papers with a tired smile. She'd said it when he was 12, after he'd been the only black student at the state math competition, and finished second. That night, he'd wanted to quit, and she'd said it again, the same way, softly, like truth didn't need volume. He opened his eyes. The fear didn't vanish, but it found its balance. He began organizing his materials, labeling every page of the project timeline, highlighting the timestamps that matched his uploads. Each sheet was dated, signed, cross-referenced. Every step had its witness. He even printed the email where Wallace had praised his initiative before rescinding his access, marking the shift from mentor to thief in one polite paragraph. At 2 a.m., Naomi knocked. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. "You should rest," she said. "I can't," he replied. "If I stop now, I'll start doubting myself." She glanced at the stack of folders. "It's too much to carry alone." He smiled faintly. "That's what they're counting on." Naomi hesitated, then placed a hand on his shoulder. "If they ask you to compromise, don't. No matter how they phrase it." "I won't." "Then win," she said, and left before he could answer. When dawn came, Malik dressed carefully. A pressed white shirt, navy jacket. Simple, deliberate. He looked in the mirror, straightened the tie, and caught himself thinking how presentation mattered more here than truth. He pushed the thought aside and whispered under his breath, "You belong." The walk to the administration building felt longer than any distance he'd crossed on campus. The rain had stopped, but the ground was slick, reflecting the glass facade like a mirror. News vans were parked at the perimeter, reporters waiting for anything they could film. Malik kept his head down as security guided him through a side entrance. Inside, the hall smelled faintly of polish and paper, clean, controlled. He waited outside the hearing room, folder in hand, while a secretary checked the schedule. The door beside him opened briefly. He caught a glimpse of Wallace inside, conversing quietly with the dean. Both looked calm. That calm scared him more than anger would have. The secretary returned. "You'll be called in shortly, Mr. Turner. Do you have representation?" He shook his head. "Just myself." She offered a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Then good luck." He waited alone in the narrow corridor. The ticking clock above the door sounded louder with every second. He thought of his scholarship, the lifeline that paid for his tuition, his housing, his chance. Without it, he had nothing. The threat from the anonymous email replayed again, the promise of financial ruin disguised as warning. He closed his eyes and pictured his mother again, imagined her hands on his shoulders, her voice steady, "You belong everywhere your mind takes you." When the door opened, the panel's clerk beckoned him inside. The room was large and windowless, lit by harsh white light. A long oak table stretched across the center, and behind it sat 6 members of the academic tribunal. Their faces were expressionless, but Malik recognized every one of them. Each was a senior faculty member. Each had served under Wallace at some point, and each owed him their position. At the head of the table, Wallace himself sat in quiet confidence, not as the accused but as an advisor to the tribunal, an arrangement disguised as procedure. Malik stopped in the doorway, realization washing over him. The words of the dean echoed from days earlier. Neutral investigation. Neutral, but surrounded by those Wallace had handpicked over years. The clerk gestured to the empty chair opposite them. "Please take your seat, Mr. Turner." He moved slowly, deliberately, refusing to show the tremor in his hands. When he sat, the chair felt too large, the table too high. He laid his folder on the surface and looked up. The dean cleared her throat. "This session is convened to determine whether Mr. Malik Turner engaged in unauthorized access and misappropriation of research materials related to Project Genesis. Professor Wallace will serve as technical advisor. Mr. Turner, you may present your statement." Malik opened the folder. "Everything I accessed was work I contributed to. The algorithms you're calling unauthorized were my own. I have timestamps proving original authorship." He distributed the copies down the table. The papers slid across polished wood, quiet but deliberate. Wallace didn't look at them. "Mr. Turner, nobody denies you contributed ideas," he said smoothly. "But contribution does not equal ownership. You were part of a larger academic process." Malik met his eyes. "A process that erases people like me when it's convenient." A low murmur moved around the table. The dean raised a hand. "Let's remain civil." Malik continued, voice steady. "Aaron James built Genesis with you 20 years ago. He was erased under the same language you're using now. Process integrity, misconduct. The difference is, I found proof." He slid another document forward, the copied faculty review from the archive. The panel members exchanged uneasy glances. One cleared his throat. "Mr. Turner, that file was sealed. How did you obtain it?" "The truth doesn't stay sealed forever," Malik said. Wallace's composure flickered. Just once. You're treading on serious ground, Turner. So are you. The dean interjected quickly, sensing the tension. Let's adjourn for 5 minutes while we review the materials. They filed out, leaving Malik alone in the sterile room. He exhaled, finally allowing his shoulders to drop. The silence pressed heavy against him. He looked at the empty chairs, the nameplates gleaming under the fluorescent light, and realized this wasn't justice. It was ceremony, designed to look like fairness while deciding nothing. He reached for his mother's bracelet on his wrist, the one thing he'd kept since the funeral, and rubbed it once for courage. From outside the door came muffled voices, Wallace's calm tone rising just enough to catch fragments. Reckless agenda. Disciplinary precedent. Then another voice, quieter but distinct. Avery's. Malik froze. He hadn't known Avery was inside. He's right about James, Avery was saying. There are records. You can't hide them forever. Wallace's reply came sharp. Then we control the narrative before he does. The conversation ended abruptly, as the door handle turned. Malik straightened just as the tribunal re-entered, faces restored to neutrality. The dean resumed her seat. Mr. Turner, the panel will reconvene tomorrow morning for final statements. Until then, we request that you refrain from speaking to the press. Malik gathered his papers slowly, eyes on Wallace. The professor smiled faintly, the same smile from that first day in class, polite, distant, condescending. Outside the building, the rain had returned, washing reflections of the overhead lights into broken pieces across the pavement. Malik stepped into it without an umbrella, the cold soaking through his jacket, grounding him. He was tired, yes, but not broken. Each drop against his skin felt like the sound of his mother's voice, steady, patient, unstoppable. He walked across the quad toward his dorm, the folders clutched tight, the bracelet cold against his wrist. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But he knew this. Silence was no longer safety. When he reached the dorm, a notice was taped to his door, official university letterhead, stamped in red, tribunal panel appointments, revised. The list of members was printed below, and every single one of them had been appointed by Wallace. The next morning broke gray and windless, the kind of quiet that always came before a storm. Malik woke before sunrise. Though he hadn't really slept, the notice from his door still lay on the nightstand, its red seal glaring in the dim light. Every name on the tribunal list had ties to Wallace. Every one. He dressed slowly, deliberately. The same pressed shirt, the same navy jacket. He wasn't dressing for respect anymore. He was dressing for battle. By the time he reached the administration building, a crowd had already formed outside. Students, reporters, even a few faculty stood clustered near the steps, waiting for the spectacle they'd been promised. Flashbulbs popped as he passed. Someone shouted his name. Someone else yelled fraud. Naomi pushed through the crowd to meet him. Her eyes were steady, but her voice was tight. They moved the hearing to the auditorium. It's open to faculty now. They said it's for transparency. Malik gave a humorless smile. Transparency for them, not me. He stepped through the double doors and into a world stage to look fair. The tribunal table had been moved to the center of the stage, lights flooding it from above, rows of seats stretched into the dark, filled with silent onlookers. At the center sat Wallace, polished and composed, flanked by the dean and 5 other panelists. Dr. Avery sat at the far end, his face unreadable. Malik wondered how much pressure he'd been under just to sit there. The dean adjusted her microphone. This session is a continuation of the inquiry into allegations regarding intellectual property and research misconduct. Both parties will have the opportunity to present evidence. Mr. Turner, as the complainant, you may begin. Malik stood, carrying his folder to the table. His pulse hammered, but his hands were steady. He connected a USB drive to the projection system. The lights dimmed slightly as the first slide appeared, a digital timeline of the Genesis project. He spoke slowly, clearly. These are my original work logs, dated and timestamped. Each revision of the algorithm was documented through the university's cloud network. The panelists leaned forward. Malik clicked to the next slide, screen captures of data entries from weeks before Wallace's supposed breakthroughs. The variables labeled here, he continued, pointing, match precisely with those used in Professor Wallace's presentation at the symposium. The metadata shows they were created under my student ID before my lab access was revoked. A murmur spread through the auditorium. Malik clicked again. Now the screen displayed two versions of the same code, one tagged Turner Prototype, the other Wallace Final. He said quietly, line by line they're identical. Except for one thing, the author tag. His replaces mine. A panelist looked toward Wallace. Professor, how do you respond? Wallace folded his hands. It's common practice for faculty to refine student submissions for broader publication. Mr. Turner's contributions were preliminary drafts. He worked under my supervision. Malik's voice cut through. Supervision doesn't mean ownership. You didn't refine it. You replaced my name with yours. Wallace turned toward him, face calm but eyes sharp. You're emotional, Malik. This is complex research. Mistakes in attribution happen. Malik met his gaze. Mistakes don't happen 3 times across 3 datasets with matching timestamps. The dean intervened quickly, sensing the room's shifting energy. Please continue with your evidence, Mr. Turner. He nodded, advancing to his final slides.
These,
He said, are encrypted backups. They were stored on external drives the night before my access was revoked. The encryption keys match my student ID. These versions include every step of the Genesis model's evolution, including early notes referencing Dr. Aaron James, whose work Professor Wallace never cited. At that name, a visible ripple moved through the audience. Malik switched to the recovered video logs. The screen flickered, and the face of Aaron James appeared, the black researcher speaking softly into his camera, 20 years earlier, explaining the empathy paradox. The air in the room thickened. The empathy loop isn't a flaw, James said on screen. It's proof of moral reasoning. Machines that can question themselves understand us better than those that simply obey. The recording faded to black. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a voice from the audience whispered, "That's Dr. James." Another said, "He worked here." Wallace shifted in his seat. "That footage," he said carefully, "is taken out of context. Dr. James's theories were never verified. They remain speculative." Malik faced the panel. He wasn't discredited. He was erased, and you built your career on what he discovered. The silence that followed was heavier than applause. Dr. Avery finally spoke, voice low but firm. The metadata corroborates Mr. Turner's claims. The timestamps, the video, the encryption, they all line. These findings cannot be dismissed as coincidence. The dean's expression tightened. She whispered something to the staff beside her, then spoke into the mic. "Thank you, Dr. Avery. The panel will now review the materials privately." Malik stared, incredulous. "Privately? This is the first time the truth's been public. Mr. Turner," she said sharply, "you will respect the process." He took a breath. "The process is what got us here." For a moment, he thought he saw something flicker in her eyes, regret, maybe, or fear. Then she turned away. The panelists huddled together, whispering. The crowd in the auditorium murmured like rising wind. Malik caught sight of Naomi in the back row. Her expression said what everyone else was too afraid to voice. They're trying to bury it again. After several tense minutes, the dean straightened. "We'll reconvene shortly, for our decision." Malik gathered his notes. Wallace remained seated, serene, hands folded like a man waiting for a meeting to end. As the panel began to file out, a young reporter stood near the side aisle, camera in hand. "Mr. Turner," she called, "do you believe the university will clear you?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "I don't need clearing, I need acknowledgement." A wave of whispers rippled through the room. Wallace finally looked up, meeting Malik's gaze across the table. His voice was calm, almost kind. "You could have had a future here, you know," he said softly. "You were talented, you just didn't understand the rules." Malik replied without raising his voice. "The rules were written so people like me never win." Wallace gave a small dismissive smile. "Then you should have written your own." The dean's voice interrupted. "We're ready to resume." The panelists returned, faces unreadable. The dean cleared her throat. "After careful consideration, and in light of conflicting accounts regarding authorship and intent, the tribunal finds the case." She paused, glancing briefly toward Wallace. "Inconclusive." A collective gasp rippled through the room. "Inconclusive?" Malik repeated, disbelief breaking through his composure. "You have proof. You saw the files." The dean continued, "Given the ambiguity of institutional oversight, we cannot assign fault without further investigation. Effective immediately, Project Genesis will remain under university supervision. Both parties are advised to refrain from external publication until review concludes." Translation: everything Malik created now belonged to the institution. Wallace stood, smoothing his suit jacket. Expression placid. A fair decision, he said. Malik's voice cracked slightly. Fair, you stole everything, and they handed it back to you gift-wrapped. The dean rose, signaling the end. This session is adjourned. He looked toward Dr. Avery, searching for some sign of defiance, but Avery's face was pale, his eyes downcast. Naomi stood in the back row, fists clenched, her mouth forming silent words he couldn't hear over the scraping of chairs and closing folders. The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with half-whispered outrage and curiosity. Reporters pushed forward, flashes blinding, microphones catching fragments. No verdict. Inconclusive. Student denies outcome. Malik stayed frozen where he stood. The screens had gone dark. The proof, the hours, the sleepless nights, all swallowed by bureaucracy. Yet somewhere deep beneath the exhaustion, something sharper than despair took root. Not rage, but clarity. He finally turned toward Wallace. You can keep the title, Malik said softly. But the truth's already out, and it's not yours anymore. Wallace's smile thinned, but he said nothing. Malik walked out into the sunlight, the roar of cameras chasing him down the steps. The flashbulbs didn't feel blinding anymore. They felt like mirrors reflecting every lie back at its source. He didn't look back. As Malik stepped through the crowd, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message flashed across the screen from an unknown number. You were never supposed to win here. But if you still want justice, meet me tonight, alone. The message still glowed on Malik's screen, as he stood on the crowded steps outside the administration building. You were never supposed to win here. But if you still want justice, meet me tonight, alone. He stared at it for a long time, his reflection faint in the cracked glass. The crowd around him blurred into a sea of flashing cameras and murmured voices, but he heard none of it. He knew a trap when he saw one, but he also knew an opportunity when it arrived, disguised as danger. That night, long after the crowd had dispersed and the rain began again, he left his dorm quietly. The air was sharp, the kind that made every sound travel farther than it should. He followed the message's coordinates to an old faculty parking lot behind the robotics building, empty except for one flickering lamppost and a single car parked under it. Dr. Avery stepped out of the shadows. Malik froze. You sent the message? Avery nodded. His expression was strained, a man pulled between duty and conscience. I couldn't speak in front of them. They're watching everything. You were on the panel, Malik said, voice tight. You could have said something. I tried, Avery said quietly. You don't understand how deep this runs. Wallace isn't just a professor. He's tied to funding grants, partnerships, board members. The Institute's reputation is built on his research. Exposing him would collapse everything they've built. Malik's jaw clenched, then let it collapse. Avery stepped closer. Listen, if you want the truth to live, don't fight them on their ground. Take it outside their reach. He handed Malik a flash drive. I copied everything I could before they locked the archives. Emails, internal memos, faculty records. It proves Wallace covered up James's work and used you the same way. Malik looked down at the drive, its metallic surface reflecting the pale light. Why are you giving this to me? Because I watched them bury one black genius already, Avery said. I won't watch them bury another. For a moment, the wind filled the silence between them. Then Malik nodded once, pocketed the drive, and walked away without another word. The next morning, Malik sat at the campus cafe, laptop open, the drive plugged in, dozens of files loaded, confidential emails between Wallace and the dean discussing narrative management, board memos strategizing how to minimize diversity-related backlash, meeting transcripts referencing intellectual reclamation. It was worse than he imagined. The theft wasn't isolated. It was systemic. He opened a blank message window and began typing. Subject, whistleblower. Lead, urge, to Rachel Sloan, investigative tech correspondent, the National Ledger. He had read Rachel's work for years. Exposés on corporate fraud, algorithmic bias, racial inequities in AI hiring. If anyone would understand the stakes, it was her. He wrote carefully, attaching samples of data logs and excerpts of emails. His message ended simply, I don't want money, I want truth. He hit send. The reply came 3 hours later. Mr. Turner, your evidence appears credible. I'll take the story, but only on one condition. If we publish, the Genesis code must be open-sourced. If it stays proprietary, the narrative becomes about theft, not transformation. Think carefully. Once it's out, it belongs to the world. Rachel Sloan. Malik sat back, staring at the message. His first instinct was resistance. He had spent months building Genesis, suffering for it, being humiliated for it. Releasing it for free would mean giving up the one thing he'd fought to protect. But then he thought of Aaron James, his voice echoing from that grainy video. Conscience scares them, because it reminds them what they've lost. Justice, Malik realized, wasn't ownership. It was liberation. He opened his code repository, compressed the final version, and attached the documentation. His cursor hovered over the Upload Publicly button. His hand trembled once. Then he clicked. The file went live. By midnight, the world was watching. The post began on Rachel Sloan's verified feed. Breaking. Whistleblower student at Harrington Institute releases AI empathy algorithm, proving decades of intellectual theft. Read full expose here. Within hours, the hashtags trended globally. Genesis Truth, Malik Turner, Stolen Genius. Thousands of developers downloaded the code. Forums exploded with discussions, analyses, simulations. Engineers and ethicists alike called it revolutionary, a framework capable of moral computation, bridging machine learning with human empathy. Whoever wrote this, one researcher tweeted, just changed robotics forever. Malik sat alone in his dorm, watching the chaos unfold in real time. His name filled the internet: praise, hate, disbelief, awe. Some accused him of fabricating everything. Others called him a hero. But for the first time since it all began, the truth wasn't confined to an office, a classroom, or a tribunal. It was alive. Naomi burst into his room, breathless. It's everywhere. CNN just aired Rachel's segment. She named you. He blinked. She? What? She said your evidence forced the Institute to issue a public statement by morning. Malik stood slowly. Then it started. Naomi nodded. It's not just a story anymore. It's a movement. By dawn, the Harrington Institute's campus resembled a fortress. News vans blocked the entrances. Protesters gathered outside the gates, holding signs that read "Honor the Real Genius" and "Justice for Aaron James and Malik Turner." Inside, administrators scrambled. The dean issued a brief press release calling the allegations deeply concerning and promising an internal review, but the internet was past listening. Screenshots of Wallace's emails circulated everywhere. Hashtags turned to headlines. The Eft in the Ivory Tower. AI's racist foundation exposed. The student who outthought his professor. By noon, Wallace's name was trending alongside Malik's. But not as a hero. Journalists unearthed old photos of him with corporate sponsors, connecting him to multi-million-dollar defense contracts tied to the Genesis model. When the press cornered him outside his office, Wallace's polished calm cracked. "This is academic terrorism," he snapped. "I mentored that boy. He's weaponizing race to rewrite history." The clip went viral. Within hours, the university's board announced an emergency session. Donors pulled funding. Major research partners suspended collaboration, pending ethical review. Meanwhile, Malik's inbox flooded again, this time with messages from developers around the world, offering collaboration, open source contributions, and words of solidarity. The Genesis project, once hidden behind walls of bias, had become global property, but not everyone celebrated. His scholarship portal displayed a single red notice: funding suspended pending administrative review. He stared at it for a long time, then closed the window. The same system that had denied him access once was trying again to silence him, but this time, it was too late. Naomi found him later that night, in the basement lab, surrounded by monitors showing news feeds and data charts. "They're investigating the Institute," she said. "Federal oversight, ethics committees, everyone's involved." Malik didn't look up. Good. Let them finally see what happens when brilliance wears the wrong skin. She hesitated. "You realize what you've done, right? Genesis is free now. You can't ever take it back." He turned to her, eyes tired but fierce. "That's the point. They can take everything from me, except the truth. Now the truth belongs to everyone." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the machines filled the space. The same hum that had once been his solitude, now the sound of change spreading across the world. Then his phone vibrated on the table. A message from Rachel Sloan. "They're calling it the Turner effect. Global robotics firms are referencing your code already. But brace yourself. The institute is under federal investigation. It's going to get ugly. Before it gets better. Malik read it twice. A strange calm settled over him. A mixture of victory and exhaustion. He looked toward the old video still playing on one of the screens. Aaron James smiling faintly into the camera before signing off. Malik whispered, "We did it." Outside, the first wave of morning news broke across every major network. Harrington Institute faces federal inquiry over decades of research misconduct. And beneath it, a still image of Malik standing in the rain outside the hearing building. Shoulders squared, face calm, eyes resolute. The institute's gates swarmed with agents, reporters and protesters as headlines screamed of scandal. But in a hidden corner office, Wallace sat alone, scrolling through his computer, watching a single line of code Malik had released, mutate and evolve in real time. His lips curved into a cold smile. "You've started something you can't control, Turner." The world had changed in a week. The Harrington Institute, once untouchable behind its polished walls and academic prestige, now found itself at the center of a national reckoning. The headlines didn't stop. Every hour brought a new expose, a new leak, a new demand for justice. AI innovators, racist legacy exposed. Federal Ethics Committee targets Harrington Institute. From genius to fraud, the collapse of Professor Grant Wallace. Outside the campus gates, protesters gathered in waves. Students from other universities joined them, holding signs that read, "Erase racism, not genius, credit the real creators, and justice for Aaron James and Malik Turner." For the first time, Malik wasn't just a name whispered in hallways or debated on forums. He had become a symbol, not of anger, but of reclamation. He watched the chaos unfold from Naomi's apartment. His laptop streaming the live news feed. The aerial shots of the protest showed thousands filling the courtyard, chanting in rhythmic defiance. Some carried banners with his face next to Aaron James's. 2 generations of stolen brilliance finally placed side by side. Naomi sat beside him, scrolling through messages. "Every network wants you on camera," she said. CNN, BBC, Wired, The Atlantic. "They're calling this the Turner effect." Malik rubbed his temples, fatigue written across his face. "I didn't want fame. I wanted the truth." Naomi smiled faintly. Sometimes truth is louder when it has a name. On screen, the university's official statement played. Effective immediately, Professor Grant Wallace has submitted his resignation amid ongoing investigation into research ethics violations. Harrington Institute remains committed to integrity, inclusion, and innovation. The clip cut to a press conference. Wallace appeared briefly before the cameras, hair unkempt, face pale, his calm confidence gone. His voice trembled slightly as he read from a paper. "I deeply regret that my work has been misinterpreted. My intent was never to exclude, but to advance science." Reporters shouted questions, flashes blinding him. He tried to continue, but his voice cracked. Security guided him away as the crowd's questions turned hostile. "Did you steal Genesis? Why did you erase Aaron James?" Naomi turned to Malik. "He's done." Malik watched silently. "No," he said finally. "He's just finished pretending." By the end of the week, federal investigators had raided the institute's data servers. Leaked documents confirmed years of unethical authorship practices. Junior researchers' names scrubbed from publications. Minority students disproportionately excluded from projects. The dean resigned within days. 2 board members followed. And through it all, Malik remained calm, almost detached, as if watching a structure crumble that he'd already mourned. Rachel Sloane's documentary aired 3 days later. The Price of Genius. It told Aaron James's story, through recovered footage, intercut with Malik's modern-day fight. The film trended globally within hours, sparking academic protests across the country. Everywhere, students of color began sharing their own stories under the hashtag #MyStolenWork. Accounts of overlooked credit, gate-kept funding, invisible labor. What had started as one student's battle had become a movement. One evening, Malik sat on Naomi's balcony as the city lights blinked below. His phone buzzed nonstop with offers, research fellowships, keynote invitations, startup proposals. MIT wanted him for a visiting scholar position. A leading robotics firm in Silicon Valley offered him a private lab. He stared at the emails without opening them. Naomi stepped outside, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "You're trending higher than most celebrities. You should be celebrating." He gave a faint smile. "It's strange. I spent years wanting to belong. Now everyone wants a piece of me, and it doesn't feel like belonging." It feels like being consumed. Naomi sat beside him. Maybe belonging isn't about where you're accepted. Maybe it's about where you can finally stand without apology. He looked out across the skyline. Then maybe I'll build that place myself. The next morning, Malik appeared on Good Morning America. The interviewer, polished and composed, began with the inevitable question. Malik Turner, the world is calling you the mind behind the empathy algorithm. Do you forgive Professor Wallace? Malik paused before answering. Forgiveness doesn't erase what was done. But I hope one day the system that created him, the system that doubted me, learns what empathy really means. The clip went viral. Within hours, corporations began citing his words in ethics pledges. Universities launched transparency initiatives, and coding forums turned his quotes into banners. It was change slow but visible, the kind born not from apology, but accountability. Meanwhile, the walls of Harrington Institute continued to tremble. Enrollment for the next semester plummeted. Donors withdrew funding. Federal committees demanded oversight. A once untouchable empire was now a cautionary tale. In the midst of it all, a letter arrived at Malik's temporary office. An embossed envelope bearing the Harrington seal. He hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Mr. Turner, the Institute acknowledges your extraordinary contributions to the field of empathetic robotics and your role in advancing academic integrity. As part of our ongoing reforms, we would be honored to invite you to return to Harrington, not as a student, but as a guest lecturer. Sincerely, Interim President, Harrington Institute. Malik read the letter twice. Expression unreadable. Naomi peeked over his shoulder. They're inviting you back? He nodded slowly. After everything they want me to teach. They're scared, she said. They're trying to rebuild their image through you. He placed the letter on the desk. Then maybe it's time they learned from the person they tried to erase. Rachel Sloan called later that evening. It's poetic, she said over the phone. The place that told you you didn't belong now wants your wisdom. Malik chuckled quietly. Poetic or ironic? Both, she said. Are you going? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the framed photograph on his desk. Aaron James smiling beside his unfinished prototype. Then his gaze drifted to the bracelet on his wrist. His mother's. Yes, he said finally. But not for them. For the ones still sitting in those classrooms, wondering if they belong. The day of the lecture, Harrington looked unrecognizable. Protest signs had been replaced with banners reading, "A new chapter begins." The once cold halls now displayed portraits of Aaron James and other under-recognized alumni. The same auditorium where Malik had once been humiliated was now filled with applause. He walked slowly to the stage, the air thick with anticipation. Faculty, students, reporters, all stood as he approached the podium. Naomi watched from the front row, pride softening her eyes. Malik paused, scanning the crowd. The same room that once silenced him now waited for his voice. He began simply, "When I first stepped into this place, someone told me I didn't belong here." The room fell completely silent. "I believed them for a while," he continued. "But belonging isn't given by permission. It's claimed by proof, and proof doesn't care about color." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. But behind the applause, Malik felt something deeper. A release years of silence finally exhaled. He looked toward the back wall, where Aaron James's portrait hung beneath a new plaque. Co-founder Genesis Project. Malik smiled. As the applause thundered, a messenger slipped through the side door and handed Malik a sealed envelope. The note inside bore no signature. Just 4 words written in neat handwriting. The story isn't over. The morning light spilled through the tall glass windows of the Harrington Institute, illuminating hallways that once carried whispers and judgment. Now they carried anticipation. Posters lined the walls. Malik Turner's name in bold above the words guest lecture. The ethics of empathy. He walked slowly through the same corridor he'd once walked, as a nervous freshman, each step echoing against the polished floors like a memory coming full circle. The same building, the same smell of varnished wood and chalk dust. But everything felt different now. The walls that once seemed to close in on him, now seemed to breathe with him. The portraits of white faculty that used to hang uninterrupted were now joined by new frames. Faces of diverse scholars, thinkers, inventors, including Aaron James, restored to the history that had denied him. Students passed by, some whispering, some smiling openly. A few nodded in silent respect. He didn't need their words. He could see the change in their eyes. The kind of quiet courage that came from seeing someone like themselves, standing where no one had stood before. Naomi met him near the lecture hall entrance, clipboard in hand, ever the steady anchor. "The room's full," she said, a hint of awe in her tone. They even opened the overflow auditorium for the live stream. Malik exhaled slowly. "Same room?" She nodded. "The same one." He smiled softly, poetic. Inside, the lecture hall buzzed with conversation. Students filled every seat, faculty lined the back walls, and a dozen cameras streamed live to classrooms across the country. The same wooden podium where Professor Wallace once stood waited at the front, its surface polished, as though preparing for a new beginning. Malik paused in the doorway. Just for a moment. The memory of that first day flashed back, him standing there, hopeful and nervous. Wallace's cold voice slicing through the air. "You don't belong here." That voice no longer haunted him. It fueled him. He stepped forward, and the room fell silent. Naomi adjusted the mic, whispering, "Whenever you're ready." Malik looked up at the audience, faces of every shade, students from every background, notebooks open, eyes bright with curiosity and something more, belief. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady but warm. "I've stood in this room before. Years ago, I sat where you are now. I was younger, quieter, and I thought belonging was something people gave you." He let the words sink in, scanning the rows. "But I learned that belonging isn't granted. It's claimed. It's not a seat someone invites you to occupy. It's a space you create by showing up, again and again, even when the world tries to erase you." The audience was silent, leaning in. He continued, "When I was a student here, I was told I didn't belong in this field, that my ideas were too ambitious, that my presence was a mistake. And for a long time, I believed that, until I realized what they feared wasn't my failure. It was my potential." A ripple of soft applause filled the room. Malik smiled faintly. "See, people in power don't always hate you because you're wrong. Sometimes they hate you because you might be right in a way they can't control." He clicked a remote. The screen behind him lit up with a single phrase in white text. "Empathy is the most advanced form of intelligence." This, he said, turning toward the screen, was the principle behind Genesis, the project they tried to take. But it was never just about code. It was about conscience. About teaching machines what some humans still struggle to learn, understanding without condition. He paused, looking toward the back of the hall where a framed photo of Aaron James now hung beside a digital display. Aaron James understood that decades ago, his work wasn't lost, it was buried. And when something is buried, it's not gone, it's just waiting to be unearthed. The room murmured in agreement. "Now," Malik said, stepping closer to the students, "you are that unearthing. You're the generation that gets to decide what progress looks like, whether it's built on exclusion or inclusion, arrogance or empathy." He let his gaze move from face to face. "When they told me I didn't belong, I almost left. But then I remembered my mother's words, 'You belong everywhere your mind takes you.' She was right. Every one of you belongs wherever your curiosity leads you, no matter what gatekeepers tell you otherwise." Naomi watched from the side, pride brimming in her eyes. She had seen him broken, defiant, and now whole. Malik turned back to the audience. "I know what it feels like to be the only one in the room who looks like you. To have your voice questioned before your work is read. I know what it's like to feel invisible in a space you've earned. But I also know this: visibility isn't given. It's built, brick by brick, word by word, truth by truth." He clicked again, and the next slide appeared, a side-by-side comparison of the Genesis code. The title above read, "From Erasure to Evolution." "This is what justice looks like," he said. "Not revenge, not retaliation, but recognition. Every line of code now bears both our names, mine and Dr. Aaron James's. That's not about ego, that's about history corrected." Applause rose again, louder this time, but Malik lifted a hand, quieting them. "And that's why I came back. Not to reopen old wounds, but to make sure no one else bleeds in silence. The institutions that once closed their doors will now have to look at you and see potential, not pity." He took a breath, voice softening. "Some of you will face what I faced, bias disguised as feedback, prejudice wrapped in professionalism. But remember this, their limits are not your boundaries." He paused, his tone deepening. "When they tell you that you don't belong, answer with excellence, so undeniable it echoes. Make them remember your name, not because you fought for permission, but because you redefined what possible means. The audience rose in applause, the sound swelling through the hall like thunder. Malik didn't move for a moment. He just stood there, letting it wash over him. The sound of acceptance, of change, of homecoming. He smiled, almost to himself. I used to dream of this room, he said softly into the mic. Of what I'd say if I ever got the chance to stand here again. But now I realize, this moment was never just mine. It belongs to everyone who was ever told they were too different, too loud, too ambitious, too black, too much of anything to fit in. He turned toward the blackboard at the back of the stage. Slowly, he picked up a piece of chalk, the same way Wallace had years ago, though his hand didn't shake. He wrote a single phrase across it in clear, deliberate strokes. We belong everywhere. The crowd fell silent again, watching him write. When he turned back, his eyes glistened, not with pride, but with peace. This, he said, gesturing toward the board, isn't a conclusion. It's an invitation. He stepped back from the podium, his voice quiet but resonant. Now it's your turn. To build, to question, to rewrite the rules, to solve the impossible. The audience stood again, applause roaring, some wiping tears, others holding up phones to capture the moment. The cameras panned slowly across the room, the faces of students, faculty and young dreamers who'd finally seen what possibility looked like when it refused to stay silent. Malik looked one last time at the blackboard, the white chalk glowing softly under the lights. The words "we belong everywhere" shimmered like a promise. As the applause faded, he whispered to himself, barely audible but filled with meaning, now it's your turn to solve the impossible. The camera pulled back, framing him against the blackboard. The man once told he didn't belong now standing where the impossible had been rewritten. And as the screen faded to black, the echo of his mother's voice seemed to linger through the silence, whispering once more the words that started it all. You belong everywhere your mind takes you. If this story made you feel that silence is never the answer, don't look away, speak up. Because every time someone stands their ground, another wall of injustice falls. Type yes if you believe in equality that can't be erased. Subscribe if you believe the truth always finds its voice.